Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going deep on a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz. Applied Behavior Analysis Therapy, ABA for short.
Yeah.
And I got to say, the sources you guys sent in, wow, this is going to be interesting. So we're talking about a therapy designed to teach skills and manage behaviors, often used with autistic folks. On the surface, it sounds pretty straightforward. But man, the more you dig into it, the more you realize it's anything but straightforward.
Right. Absolutely. It's one of those things where you've got people on one side praising it as like the gold standard, the be-all, end-all of autism care. They're pointing to research, success stories, the whole 9 yards. But then on the other side, you've got folks who are using terms like, get this, conversion therapy.
Whoa, hold on. Conversion therapy.
Yeah.
That's a pretty loaded comparison, isn't it?
It is, and it speaks to just how deep these divisions run.
So how do we even begin to unpack all of this? I mean, with such drastically different viewpoints out there, it feels like understanding those nuances, both the good and the not so good, is going to be super important, right?
Couldn't agree more. And it's crucial to remember that we're not just talking about ABA in a vacuum here, you know? The decisions families make about this therapy are often influenced by so many different factors, things like race, disability, systemic inequity. We need to be looking at this through what we call an intersectional lens to really grasp the complexities.
Okay, I'm with you. Intersectional lens, got it. But first, let's back up for a sec. Can we break down the basics here? What exactly is ABA therapy, and how does it actually work in practice?
Sure. So at its core, ABA is all about understanding behavior, like how behavior works and how it can be changed. Therapists use a system of rewards and consequences to encourage the behaviors they want to see and, well, decrease those they don't.
So is it kind of like, I don't know, training a dog, but with humans? I know. That's probably oversimplifying things.
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. I mean, ABA is rooted in the principles of learning theory. It's been studied extensively. It's not just, giving treats for sitting.
All right, fair enough. Not dog training. But seriously, why is it so controversial? What are the main arguments for and against using ABA?
Okay, so let's start with the folks who are pro-ABA. They see it as the most evidence-based approach out there for addressing the challenges that sometimes come with autism, especially behavioral challenges. They'll point to the research that's been done, and there's definitely research out there. They'll talk about how it's helped people learn essential skills, how it's helped reduce those really tough behaviors.
Okay, so I can see that side of it. But what about the other side, the critics? What are they saying?
Well, critics will argue that ABA puts way too much emphasis on outward compliance, that it can end up suppressing those natural autistic behaviors. Like, it's trying to force autistic people to fit into a neurotypical box instead of, accepting and embracing their neurodiversity.
So instead of celebrating those differences, it's more about making them, I don't know, disappear, blend in. I can definitely see how that could be harmful.
Exactly, and some autistic people who've gone through ABA describe it as actually traumatic, feeling like they were being forced to change who they fundamentally are. And that's where that comparison to conversion therapy comes in.
Oof, yeah, that's heavy. And this whole debate got even more heated recently with United Healthcare's decision to deny coverage for ABA claims.
Oh, yeah, that was a bombshell.
It really feels like a turning point in this whole conversation, doesn't it?
For sure. You've got people interpreting that decision in totally different ways. Some say it's a positive step, aligning with those growing ethical concerns about ABA. Others see it as just a cost-cutting measure, disguised as progress.
It's interesting because one of the things that keeps coming up in the sources is this idea of the autism industrial complex.
Right.
What exactly does that mean? And how does it tie into all of this?
So the autism industrial complex is basically this network of organizations and businesses that profit, that make money from autism services and treatments. Critics argue that it puts profit before the actual needs of autistic people.
So you're saying that sometimes decisions about care are driven by money. That's kind of cynical, but I guess we got to consider all angles.
We do, especially when we start thinking about the experiences of marginalized communities, particularly African-American families raising autistic kids.
You're right. A lot of this ABA debate seems to happen in a bubble. Like it's not really considering the unique challenges and perspectives of these families. And that's something that jumps out from the sources you gave me.
Yeah, that intersectional lens is crucial.
Absolutely. Like there's this article about D.L. Hewley, the comedian, and the fears he has for his autistic son's safety. And this is D.L. Hewley we're talking about, someone with wealth and fame.
Right.
But it just highlights the very real dangers that Black parents face, knowing that their kids are just more vulnerable to police brutality.
And then you have the tragic case of Stefan Watts, a 15-year-old Black autistic boy killed by police in his own home. It's a devastating reminder of how autistic behaviors can be tragically misinterpreted.
It's heartbreaking, and it makes you wonder how these fears, these very real dangers, impact how African American parents make decisions about ABA.
For some Black parents, ABA, with its emphasis on compliance, can feel like the only way to try and keep their kids safe. It's a terrible dilemma, this impossible choice between potentially suppressing their child's true self and trying to protect them from a world that can be so hostile.
So it's not just about therapy, it's about survival. Wow, that's a lot to process. So we've got ABA being praised and criticized, financial motives mixed in with ethical concerns, and then this whole layer of systemic inequities that shape the choices families have to make.
It's a lot.
Where do we even go from here?
Well, I think we got to start by acknowledging that for many families, ABA is a symptom of a much bigger problem. It's a response to a system that's not adequately supporting autistic people and their families.
So if we want to move past this whole ABA debate, we have to address those underlying systemic issues. We have to figure out what a better system would look like.
Exactly. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of this deep dive. We'll explore those systemic forces and start envisioning what a more just and equitable future could look like for all autistic individuals. You know, it's really interesting how the history of policing in the U.S., it's kind of intertwined with this whole conversation about ABA and how it's used, especially in marginalized communities.
Okay, now that's not a connection I would made right away.
Yeah.
How does policing fit into all of this?
Well, you got to think about the roots of American policing, right? Like, where did it all begin? It can be traced all the way back to slave patrols.
Slave patrol.
Yeah, basically groups of armed white men who were enforcing that brutal system of slavery. Their whole purpose was to maintain this economic order built on the backs of enslaved Black people. And that underlying purpose, that enforcement of systemic inequality, it kind of echoes through the centuries. You know, it impacts the relationship between law enforcement and Black communities even today.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. So you're saying that the very foundation of policing, at least here in America, is rooted in racism,
Yeah.
in control.
Exactly. And unfortunately, that legacy, it hasn't gone away. American police, they have a lot of power and they're often shielded from accountability, which has led to a culture where Black individuals are disproportionately targeted, subjected to police violence, you know?
That's a scary thought. And I can't even imagine how much more terrifying that reality must be for parents of Black autistic children. It's like this double layer of fear and vulnerability.
Absolutely. See, autistic individuals often communicate and behave in ways that can be misconstrued, especially by people who aren't familiar with autism. Things like simming, delayed responses, sensory meltdowns. These can be misinterpreted as defiance or even aggression, especially by law enforcement who are trained to view noncompliance as a threat.
Man, that's a recipe for disaster, especially in a society that demands like instant and unquestioning obedience to police commands.
It's a dangerous situation for sure. And for many Black parents, ABA, with its emphasis on teaching compliance, it can feel like the only way to try and protect their kids.
Yeah.
It's this heartbreaking dilemma. Do you potentially suppress your child's authentic self, or do you try to equip them with behaviors that might, increase their chances of surviving in a world that can be so hostile?
So it's not just about therapy, it's about survival. It's about parents doing whatever they can to keep their children safe in a system that's stacked against them. Man, that's heavy.
It is. And it's not just about policing either. The sources you sent, they highlight how systemic neglect in other areas like education, healthcare, social services, they all contribute to this problem. When marginalized communities don't have access to quality support systems, it creates this void. And families are left with limited options, and things like ABA, even with the concerns, can seem like the only lifeline.
It's like ABA is filling a void created by the very institutions that should be providing these families with support in the first place.
Exactly. That's a really important point. Until we address those fundamental systemic inequities, until we create truly equitable support systems, we're going to keep seeing interventions like ABA used, even when there are concerns about potential harm. It's like treating the symptom, not the disease.
So if ABA is the symptom, what's the cure? What would a genuinely just and equitable system look like? How do we move beyond this reliance on ABA and create something better?
Well, it's a complex challenge, no doubt, but I think step one is recognizing that ABA, it's not the solution in and of itself. It's a temporary fix, a Band-Aid on a much deeper societal wound. And if we want to actually heal that wound, we got to radically rethink our approach.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's get radical.
Imagine a world where instead of relying on police forces, with their history and baggage and often really fraught relationships with marginalized communities, we invest in community-based systems of safety and accountability, systems that are designed to actually protect and serve everyone, regardless of race, neurodiversity, whatever
Yeah,
difference.
okay. Yeah.
Imagine schools that embrace neurodiversity, providing individualized support that caters to each student's needs and strengths, not trying to force everyone into the same mold. Imagine a healthcare system that prioritizes holistic care, grants universal access to culturally competent services that are about supporting people, not controlling them.
Wow, that sounds amazing. A world where everyone feels safe, supported, empowered to be themselves. It sounds like utopia. But how do we get from here to there? How do we make that transformation happen?
It's a long road, no doubt, but I think the key is to shift our focus away from controlling behavior and towards cultivating genuine understanding and acceptance. It's about building a culture where differences are celebrated, not feared or punished, and where everyone feels valued for who they are, not for how well they conform.
I love that. So it's about moving away from a mindset of fear and control and towards one of acceptance and empowerment.
Exactly, and that means we have to fundamentally reconsider how we allocate resources. Right now, we pour billions into policing and incarceration, systems rooted in control and punishment.
Yeah.
What if we redirected those resources towards building systems of care and support designed to actually uplift and empower communities?
That's a powerful idea, but realistically, wouldn't that require a massive shift in priorities for, like, our entire society?
It absolutely would, but I don't think it's impossible. History shows us that when people come together and demand change, transformative things can happen. Look at the civil rights movement, the LGBTQ plus rights movement, the disability rights movement. All of these movements started with people demanding something better, more just, and they ultimately made the world a better place.
That's incredibly inspiring. So you're saying if we want to build a world where interventions like ABA aren't seen as necessary, we got to be willing to fight for a more just and equitable society for everyone, a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Exactly. It's about dismantling the systems of oppression that hold so many people back and creating something new, something better. And it's a fight that every single one of us can and should be a part of.
You know, I'm feeling really fired up about this. It's easy to get bogged down in the complexities and the negativity, but hearing you talk about the possibilities for change, it gives me hope. But I'm also curious to hear more about what those alternative support systems might look like, in practice. What concrete things could we invest in that would actually support autistic individuals and their families? What does a better future actually look like?
That's a fantastic question. And honestly, I think it deserves a deep dive all its own. There are so many incredible ideas and initiatives out there that are already working towards creating more inclusive and affirming spaces for neurodivergent individuals. And in the next part of our conversation, I think it would be really valuable to highlight some of those efforts and learn from the people who are on the front lines of this movement.
I am totally on board with that. Let's dive into those alternative support systems and the communities leading the charge for a more just and equitable future for all autistic individuals. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the problems, the systemic issues that kind of lead to this reliance on ABA therapy, especially for those marginalized communities. But I want to shift gears now. Let's talk solutions. Let's get hopeful. What does a future look like where we've moved beyond meeting interventions like ABA? What are those support systems that would truly empower autistic individuals and their families?
I think it starts with understanding and respecting neurodiversity, right? Like really getting that. We got to move away from this idea that autistic individuals need to be fixed, or made to conform to neurotypical standards.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where we celebrate those differences, where we provide resources that actually allow autistic people to thrive as their authentic selves.
Yeah, I like that. Instead of trying to make everyone fit into the same mold, we embrace the uniqueness.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we get there?
Well, it means investing in things like culturally competent therapies and support services, but it's super important that these services are designed with input from autistic people and their families, not just imposed from the top down. We got to listen to the people who are most affected.
That makes sense. The sources you gave me, they really emphasize community-led solutions. Why is that so important?
Because communities, they often have this deep understanding of their own needs, right? They're best equipped to create solutions that are tailored to those needs. We need to empower communities to develop their own support systems instead of relying on these one-size-fits-all approaches.
So it's about recognizing the expertise and lived experiences of those within the community.
Exactly.
Okay, so where do we see that happening? Where do we see those community-led solutions in action?
One area where this is crucial is education. Imagine schools that are truly inclusive, responsive to the needs of neurodivergent learners. We're talking flexible seating arrangements, sensory-friendly classrooms, individualized learning plans.
It sounds like a learning environment where every student can succeed.
Right. And it's not just about the physical space, it's also about how teachers approach their students.
Yeah, for sure.
We need educators who understand and appreciate neurodiversity, who are trained to adapt their teaching methods to those individual needs. And of course, autistic students need access to resources like occupational therapy, speech therapy, counseling.
Okay, so we've got inclusive schools, supportive therapies. What else can we envision in this future where we've moved beyond ABA?
Well, something that often gets overlooked is the need for sensory-friendly public spaces. Think about it going to a museum, a library, even a grocery store, but designed with sensory sensitivities in mind. Things like designated quiet areas, dimmed lighting, minimizing unnecessary noise and visual clutter. That would make a huge difference.
That's a great idea. It would allow autistic individuals to participate more fully in their communities without feeling overwhelmed or excluded. What other kinds of support systems could we create?
Financial support is huge. Raising a child with a disability can be incredibly expensive, and so many families struggle to afford those therapies and resources. Some folks are advocating for a universal basic income, which would give everyone a guaranteed minimum income no matter what. That could really help alleviate that financial burden.
That's a fascinating idea. It seems like a radical shift, but it kind of speaks to a deeper need for our society to reevaluate how we value and support individuals with disabilities, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's about moving away from the idea that disability is a burden or a deficit and recognizing the strengths, the contributions that neurodivergent people bring.
Hmm.
We need a culture of inclusion and acceptance.
It's about shifting from fixing people to empowering them.
That's it. And it requires us to challenge those systems of oppression that have marginalized and silenced autistic people for way too long. We have to amplify their voices, listen to their experiences, work together to create a world that's truly just and equitable for everyone.
You know, one thing that struck me in the sources was this idea that there isn't just one autistic community. There are so many different individuals with varying needs and perspectives. How do we make sure all of those diverse voices are heard and represented in this movement for change?
That's so important. We got to avoid making assumptions about what autistic people want or need, We need to create spaces for dialogue, for collaboration, where different perspectives can be shared. And it's especially crucial to center the voices of those who have been historically marginalized and excluded, including people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, those with intersecting disabilities.
So it's not just about advocating for autistic individuals, it's about recognizing the diversity within that community and making sure everyone has a seat at the table.
Exactly. It's about building a movement that's intersectional and inclusive, recognizing that the fight for disability justice is connected to all these other social justice movements. We got to build coalitions, work in solidarity with other marginalized groups to challenge those systems of oppression that affect all of us. Our liberation is bound together.
This has been an amazing deep dive. We went from the controversies of ABA therapy to the systemic issues and now to this vision of a future where those interventions aren't even necessary. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
And I hope our listeners feel the same. It's important to remember that these aren't just abstract ideas,
Yeah.
These are real lives, real families who are dealing with this every day. It's up to all of us to take action.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners who are feeling inspired, who want to get involved, what can they do?
There are so many ways to make a difference. Start by educating yourself about autism and neurodiversity. Seek out resources from autistic creators and advocates, listen to their stories, connect with local organizations that are doing the work, donate your time, donate your money, advocate for policy changes, and most importantly, challenge ableism and discrimination wherever you see it.
That's a fantastic call to action. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. This has been truly eye-opening.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all of you listening, thank you for tuning into the deep dive. We hope you learned something new, that you're feeling inspired to create a more just and equitable world. Remember, building a better future, it's a collective responsibility. We all have a role to play. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for change.